So the basic question is, what does it mean to you? When do you want to plan for retirement? How long will retirement last? So when do you plan to retire? If you're even thinking about it, I always say 5 to 10 years out, before 65, 55, 50, 55, start thinking about it. What steps can you be doing with your investments now? There's many tools. If you guys have come to some of our previous classes, many tools that we use have 10-year time horizons that will do really cool leverage things for you. So if you've got 10 years, you can make your money work harder. How long retirement will last? This is something that I have a lot of people that don't believe me when they come in the office. When we plan for retirement, we plan to 95, 100. When I first came in into this industry 10, 12 years ago, all our calculation tables went out to age 85. 3 years ago, every insurance company out there, you guys may have heard this, changed their mortality tables. They went older. If you go get an insurance quote today and you're looking for permanent insurance, they'll ask you, you want guaranteed to 100, guaranteed to 115, or 120? It's a serious question they'll ask. And I can run a report that says 120. We want it guaranteed 120. Why do you think that is? Yeah, it's a reality. But something that a lot of times we don't think about is that my parents only lived like 80, right? I don't have longevity in my family. Yes and no, you have to consider that, but at the same time, you consider how much we've advanced medicine-wise. There was not quadruple bypass surgeries, 20 years ago. Replacement knees, replacement hips, all those kind of things that are available today that just, you're back and running. So it's important to understand that retirement can last a long time. Good and bad, right? It means you need more money. It means you need to use tools that have guarantees that will put your money out there because you need to shift some of that risk somewhere else. So those are the classes that we teach at times. If we're going to retire early, make more money. We've got fewer years to accumulate wealth, right? And this is a big thing. When I run the calculations, whether someone wants to retire at 55 or somebody wants to retire at 62 or 65, the thing that turns the table around quite a bit is that those first 7 years, where's all the money coming from? Your own pocket, right? You don't even have the help of Social Security. So because of that, you eat a lot more of your assets. And if you've got the assets, then great. But this is a consideration that we need to have. The other thing is, will I have insurance? If I'm going to retire at 55, we'll have insurance from 55 through 65 until Medicare kicks in. If we delay, then it's the opposite happens, right? We have more time to accumulate. We can put more on Social Security, so on and so forth. As we talked about earlier, it might be one of those things that you work during retirement, even part-time. We work in retirement. Well, the one thing that we think about is, do we start at 62 or 65 or 66? Well, why is that difference? Social Security, full retirement age. How much can you make if you choose early retirement from Social Security at 62? $14,100, I believe, if that number hasn't changed. So if you're going to make over $14,100 at age 62, you might want to wait till 66 because they're going to penalize you for every $2 you make. They'll withdraw $1 benefit. So that's an important consideration. If you plan to just make $14,000, then that might be a good option as well. Healthcare is another thing that you could do if you have part-time retirement. So the three main goals is, what do we want to do in retirement, and try to maximize, our goals, what we're trying, what is retirement all about? We work for 30, 40 years, and then we're going to stop working. What are we going to do with that time? Manage the risks of outliving your income. We'll talk about that. And then the unexpected life events. So some of the roadblocks. So here's the process. If you walk into my office and we start discussing, the first thing that we talk about is we estimate how much income you'll need. And how do I do that? I ask you what your expenses are. One big mistake. I see spreadsheets come in my office all the time because a lot of smart people, a lot of engineers in the room bring me spreadsheets and all sorts of stuff and plug them in. I'm like, oh my God, you missed this first thing. Inflation. You have to inflate your expenses. Then we look at income. So the very next thing, my first column will be your expenses. My next column will be what incomes do you have? It will be Social Security. When will that start? And I'll put it in the spreadsheet when that starts. I'll say, when does your pension start? If you're fortunate enough to have a pension, we'll put pension there. We won't inflate inflation. We won't inflate pension because it doesn't inflate. I might inflate Social Security by 1.5%. And then if there's any other incomes, properties, rental properties, that kind of stuff, we'll put it in there. And so we want to make sure to figure out what's already going to be coming in retirement. How do we plan that? And then we look at the deficit, obviously, and we identify the gap. So the very next column is, here's the minuses or the pluses. Sometimes there's pluses. And so what we want to do, so where we're going to get this money is from our investments, right? And that's when the planning, that's when my part of the planning comes in. That's when the knowledge of products and what leveraging can do and all these other things can do comes in. And so I can go say, okay, well, we have this deficit, how are we going to fill these gaps? And sometimes these products, you know, are 10-year products. Sometimes they start immediately, sometimes they're 10-year products, and we can go in there and kind of fill the gaps, and that's kind of where we come in to do that. And the last part is using the savings to purchase account. So it's a fairly simple process. My job is not rocket science. I mean, I wish it was, but it's not. I mean, this is what we do every day. This is the biggest part, is how are we going to, what tools will we use to guarantee that you're going to have an income, a check that we would replace. The biggest job is replacing your payroll department. How are we going to replace that? And that's a decision that we'll come up with together, because it's, at the end of the day, it's your decision. It's my job to educate you on what's available. So let's talk about the income you'll need. I've never liked rules of thumb. I've liked going in more precise. We do the expenses will change, like the home that we just talked about, that kind of thing. A lot of times people don't list hobbies. And once we put their expenses down, I will ask the question, how will retirement change? What hobbies do you have? So we want to put something in there to make sure that we're covering for that, because we want to make sure that you're able to go back to the enjoying retirement. We want to make sure that's in there. Healthcare, big thing. In many surveys that I've seen, the #1 concern about retirement is healthcare, right? Because we just have this idea that healthcare is really expensive, and it is. But how will we tackle that? Medicare starts at 65, and that's where that'll be your primary form of insurance. Many of you will have secondary forms of insurance. A lot of times, you know, some of the companies will provide the secondary, maybe the IBM coverage or some of the coverages there. Prescription drug coverage, Medigap policies or policies that cover any gaps. We look at roadblocks, or we look at things that might derail your plan. The #1 thing that will derail your plan is not accounting for long-term care. Because we are living longer, more and more people will need long-term care. As it is right now, it's like 1 in 2 people need long-term care. This is the most used insurance, period. I saw a statistic not too long ago where using your homeowner's insurance, it's 1 in 20. Using your car insurance is 1 in 6. Using this is 1 in 2. What good is saving all this money that we've saved if you're going to have to spend it down really quick if one of you goes into a facility? Because the expenses on this right now today is like $60,000, $70,000 a year. 3 ways to pay for it: out of pocket, rely on Medicare, Medicaid, or long-term care insurance. Out of pocket will drain your finances pretty quick. Medicaid, you got to give everything out. Long-term care insurance, you pay for it. On average, long-term care is going to pay, I mean, it's going to depend on age, right? Health. But you're looking at a couple $1,000s a year per person. Could go up from there, could go down. I mean, we've had various quotes lately, but think about that. It's $4,000 a year per person to have this coverage. But at this cost right here, you can make that up the first year that you go into long-term care. Accounting for inflation, we want to recognize the impact of tax. So one of the things is most people have their savings in their 401k. Understand that even if you don't want to spend your money in your 401k, at 70.5, you're going to have to start spending your R&Ds, and you're going to have to pay taxes. So we normally count that in. The other thing that I ask for is, or the other thing that I'll quickly do, is structure your assets. I'll say, okay, what do you have in cash, stocks, and mutual funds that's already been taxed? Just your regular liquid funds. What do you have in tax deferred, like your 401ks, your IRAs? And then what do you have in tax free? The reason I classify all that immediately is because I want to know what we'll spend later and what we'll spend now and what needs to be start spending at 70. When we go through understanding risk, there's a lot of times when people say, I don't want to take any risk with my money. What are they talking about? Market risk, right? Been through one of these markets like 2008, right? I don't want that to happen again. So there is market risk, but there's other risks that are a slower death, right? So interest rate risk, reinvestment risk, really big things too. So the purpose of this is your assets shouldn't be in any one place. You should have CDs. CDs are important. Money markets are important. Every one of my clients, if you're in here, you know that it's the same thing. I always say emergency funds. Emergency funds, where do they belong? Money market account and the CDs. Short term, small amount of money, I don't care how much it's making, it's there for a purpose, right? So everyone should have that, but that's not where your retirement should be because you have these issues. Three-legged stool, you may have seen this. It just kind of talks about where your income's kind of come in from. It's your Social Security, your pension if you have one, and then your individual savings and investments. We've touched on this, but essentially, you know, when it comes to savings, you've had a certain allocation saving for retirement. We've had a certain, you know, maybe you used 60% stocks, 70% stocks, and 40% bonds. Maybe your allocation is a bit different. As you get into retirement, we need to look at that a little bit closer. Most people will want to start getting more conservative with their investments, shifting the risk, because you don't have the time that you did before to take the market risks, right? So because of that, there's two things that can be used to minimize your risks. One typically is bonds and cash. You shift your assets. Now what happens when you move your assets to bonds and cash? What happens to your rate of return? It goes down. Is that something that you want for the next 50 years? Maybe, maybe not. So we'll discuss that. The second thing is insurance. You can buy insurance for your investments, and some of the products that we've talked about include that insurance option. And then you have to weigh out, is it worth it to me to pay, you know, the percent or percent, whatever it is, more to have an insured product that allows me to stay in a growth portfolio for the next 30 years so I can make more of a rate of return and I'll net the difference? Or do I want to take the risk myself and just use bonds? And that's a decision that we'll talk about and let you guys make the decision, but I want to educate you on both options. Asset allocation, we just talked about your immediate need versus, so what we'll do is sometimes, and we talked about making the assets in different segments. What I'll make sure is we cover is what will we need for the first 10 years? Because your need will be first 10 years might be different. You might still be paying off a house, so on and so forth. You might be trying to cover a gap. So we'll have our income needs, but then do not forget about your long-term needs. So let's not forget about the inflation and what we'll need. A lot of times I find people like, yeah, I want to use these assets, but I don't want to lock them in for this point because what if I need them? Well, yeah, but what if you don't have a check then? It's just as important to cover your check than it is to use assets now. So it's just that mentality of what do I need now versus long term. So these are some of the things that we've discussed. We'll just touch on the slide, but essentially bonds and bond funds are good. We should have some of those in our portfolio. We've had classes here on bond funds, especially right now with interest rates being as low as they are. You're getting next to nothing in money markets. We still should have some money in money market CDs, maybe a minimal amount for immediate access. But bond funds can get you 2 to 4%, 2 to 6%. It's much better than 0.5 that you get in a money market, 0.2, getting 10 times more in a bond fund. And you are stepping outside of the risk to take them a little bit because it's not an insured product like a CD or a money market is, but at the same time, you are getting about 10 times more return for very, very little risk. And you can look at the track record over the last 10 years and say, okay, what happened in 08? Oh, this thing lost 1%. I can take that kind of risk for making about a 2 to 4% rate of return. Dividend paying stocks, that's also a good option. As I said earlier, every kind of investment has a good place in your portfolio. It's just a matter of having diversification in your portfolio and trying to figure out what we're trying to achieve. The reason I like these is just because it's insured. Because I can sit here and run a calculation and say, you will have guaranteed income in 10 years of X amount of dollars. And I'm going to stick that number in the plan, and I'm going to forget about it. I'm going to move on to the next problem. Your withdrawal rate, 4 to 5%. If you're not going to use like a guaranteed solution, like an annuity, how much will you pull out of your investments? I wouldn't go more than 5. I would stay closer to 4. This keeps your assets. There's like an 86% chance if you do no more than 4% distribution that you will not outlive your money. The one thing that we need to talk about is estate planning concerns using IRAs. You don't mostly never want to name your estate as the beneficiary of your IRA. You want to name a person, because if you name anything other than a living entity, taxes are due immediately upon your death. We talked about saving and a half. At saving and a half, you have to start pulling your money out of your traditional IRAs, your 401ks, 403bs, with the exception if you're still employed. If you're still employed and you're still contributing to, if you're still employed and have a 401k at your current employer, you can continue to contribute to your 401k at your current employer and not take RMDs out of that. Another source of potential income could be your home. It's one of those things where last resort, we look at reverse mortgage. Thank you. Reverse mortgages. Not something I'm really fond of, but we definitely look at either downsizing or reverse mortgages as the last resort if you haven't saved enough. Let's try not to get there. Let's try to use other assets first. So as a recap, you know, just wanted to kind of discuss or go over your needs, your income needs. Do not forget about inflation. Do not forget about, you know, how long you're going to live. And then some of the personal savings. What plan are you in now? Are your assets all in cash? What do they look like now? Are they appropriately invested? If not, if you have any questions, take a free visit with me. I'll take a look at your assets and it'll just give you some ideas on what you should be doing even now, even if you're not ready to retire. So those are some ideas.